This is June 2021. I'm sitting in my lounge at home, and so I think my first experience of psychodrama was when I lived in Nelson back in the 1900s. I went to a workshop with Katerina Seligman, and Walter Logerman was at that workshop also. He was a close friend of one of my neighbours, so I met Walter way back then. So that would have been early 1980s, I think. And we did this workshop out at Todd Valley, I think it was, with about a dozen people. And it was pretty wild, on the edge stuff, I must say. It was a mixture of encounter and also she used some psychodramatic technique, role reversal, and I thought this was fascinating stuff. I didn't know how she was bringing about what was emerging, but I kind of got a little bit hooked. And it was not too long after that I pursued this psychodrama and ended up going to a workshop in Tuakau, south of Auckland. And that was a real turning point in my life. At that time I was a tutor in the Polytech, I think, at Nelson Polytechnic, tutoring nurses. And I'd worked in the hospital system, having had a background in nursing and trained in midwifery. And I was a bit disillusioned with aspects of the hospital system, the hierarchies and separations and, you know, the way patients were. I just wanted a more holistic environment, really, and a bit more spontaneity and life, you know, in the system. Well, I go to this workshop at Tuakau, and boy, that blew my mind. I thought, I have found my tribe, because here I met people like Rex and Val Hunton, Rex being a lecturer in the med school in Auckland at that time, and Valerie, a wonderful, creative, lively, vital artist. I happen to have, it just happens, and it's not even a setup, this photograph of them that I took when I saw them not long before Rex died, actually, when I went up to visit. And they were absolutely inspirational for me right through my training. And I loved them both. And I think for myself how much love, yeah, they modelled love and I felt love, and how that really assisted my learning in many ways. It's an interesting thing, we don't think about the value of love in learning. But yeah, I just felt hugely open-hearted towards them and appreciated their warmth and generosity, and I still am connected with Valerie. So there I met Rex and Val. I met Felicity and John Saxby, who worked at Tokanui at that time. John was a psychiatrist and Felicity did group work with the patients. And I met Sandra Turner, who was a psychotherapist down in Dunedin, practicing psychodrama. Robert Crawford, who was the superintendent at Hanma Hospital. I thought, this is a relief. I can talk to these people in very different ways. I saw them, you know, both directing and being protagonists and auxiliaries in dramas. And I thought, this is really creative, wonderful, real stuff that's getting to the nitty-gritty. So I was hooked. And I guess I love thinking about what were the turning points in your life. You know, sometimes it's a crisis that creates a turning point, or something rather wonderful, or an encounter, meeting somebody wonderful, or an experience. And certainly this workshop event was a turning point. And I came back to Nelson and started to find out how I could pursue this psychodrama. And it might have been one of the motivators for me to return to Christchurch. I wanted to finish my degree, and I didn't want to be doing it long distance, whereas there was a campus down here where I'd originally started. I wanted to study in psychodrama, and they had training down here in Christchurch. And I got a job at the Christchurch Polytech, where I worked for 6 years. And initially I was wondering, how do you integrate the psychodrama, which looked like psychotherapy, into my work as an educator? Because you don't want to be unpacking too much psychopathology or whatever, persons winding people up to their distress in an education setting. So it did take me a while, but I had the fortune of teaching in a module called Caring and Communication, where we were teaching the nurses about, communicating, listening, empathic responding, and self-awareness. And I had carte blanche to do almost what I wanted, because the other people in the Polytech, apart from one colleague, didn't know anything about this subject, so we didn't get contained in any way. And my colleague, Richard Bolstad, who was in fact a pretty ardent NLPer, neuro-linguistic programmer, and now teaches internationally, him and I had a great relationship and worked very well in this arena, because we were both interested in helping the nurses develop, or the students develop, their self-awareness and their responsiveness to patients, because that had been what had been a missing link, I thought, in the hospital system. And I'm pleased to say, having been a patient in the hospital system in recent times, things have changed quite a lot. I'm quite impressed with staff having a lot more attunement to patients, and I've congratulated them on this fact. So I started trying to integrate the method into my teaching, and then I heard about this practicum opportunity in Western Australia with Warren Parry, who I'd already met, and it was for a 10-week training program called Organisational Group Work. Warren was a consultant in organisations using the method. He was an architect and using the methodology in his architectural consultations. So he had more of a methodology using sociodrama and some theory on how to integrate this method into working in organisational settings. Well, I ended up going to the practicum, and the Polytech allowed me that time off as part of my sabbatical, paid for my training over there. Oh no, they paid my wages while I was away, my salary while I was away. They might have even paid for the training, I don't know, but it felt a generous and wonderful opportunity for me, because I didn't know anyone else that was doing this kind of thing. Off I went, and the psychodrama practicum blew my mind. It was one of the most dynamic and exciting, I guess, sometimes challenging experiences I'd had, and I loved being in a group of 21 people doing psychodrama and processing and learning about group work just about all our waking hours. Even on the weekends, every second weekend, we would have a workshop. And it was a wonderful and rare opportunity. Australasians, some people from Japan, England, and I loved that experience of being in community, learning about ourselves and each other, and doing some pretty in-depth work over that time. And that enabled me, especially with Warren's modelling and frameworks and theory, I needed that to make sense of psychodrama and how to use it in an educational setting. And at university I'd studied some organisational psychology, but I found Warren's teaching, because it was really about application in some creative ways, and I loved that creativity. it was a stimulant to me. So I thank those people, and there must have been several trainers involved, Trish Williams, Tom Wilson, Warren Perry, Lorna DeLolo, for that extraordinary experience. And it enabled me to expand my work later on when I trained in psychotherapy and practiced as a psychotherapist. That led on to doing some work in organisations and mentoring people, and really having a framework that helped people get more conscious of themselves without it being in-depth psychotherapy, which most of the psychodrama experiences I had were very oriented towards the therapeutic side of the method. And I would just say that in my various learnings through my career, psychodrama has been a real gift, because it enabled me to work more creatively, and through working more creatively it enabled me to feel vitalized in myself, to keep my own vitality nourished. So I feel a lot of gratitude towards some of those initial people that inspired me. I'd also like to reflect on the work of Lynette Clayton. She also was one of our trainers at the practicum, and I so appreciated her in-depth understanding of psychopathology. The sessions were called A Walk Through the Garden of Madness, and she was able to really give us examples from her clinical experience and deepen our understanding of using the method in those situations. I appreciated her sharing theory, and once again some more, how would I say it, some more structured teaching, which helped me a lot to put frameworks around things. I really benefited from some formal teaching sessions. University, by comparison, didn't have enough, had lots of formal teaching sessions and not enough experience, but together psychodrama and the formal teaching went well together, and Lynette integrated them both. I also felt a lot of love and respect for her, because she was loving and respectful, a woman of humility and grace. And I really enjoyed being in her company and in her teaching. I think it makes a difference for me if I can respect and feel loving towards somebody I'm learning from. Might not matter to some people, but I think it's helped me greatly, because I enjoy relationships, relating. It's energizing, motivating. Thank you, Lynette. But once I came down to Christchurch, I was learning more about the method, and especially after I'd been to the practicum, I was able to use the method, especially in the caring and communication classes, because we could set out dynamics of relationships. I could have the students role reversing. I could have them, I could use all sorts of group warm-up techniques to get them interacting and seeing each other, and personal and self-revealing. It just made I used to really look forward to those sessions, because instead of standing up doing whiteboard sort of teaching, a lecture style, it would be a more open, spontaneous session on some aspect of communicating or relating to human beings. So I was quite excited by seeing the students grow through the module, and they all had to do a self-awareness project, identifying some aspect of themselves that they wanted to change, or a self-defeating habit that they wanted to eliminate, or a relationship they wanted to improve. And it was quite gratifying to see how the process, the group process that we were using in those sessions, enabled them to get more aware of themselves and to share a bit more about their vulnerabilities. So through the use of action, just simple things, continuums, sociograms, simple role reversal, role reversing with each other, mirroring, doubling, they picked things up and they learned, and they had a very positive response to those courses, and I enjoyed them myself, and I think it was a great opportunity for them, because during their 3-year training they didn't have a lot of other content of that nature. You know, it got more and more clinical as they got more competent. So that was teaching. And I trained as a psychotherapist, but I certainly used the tools of psychodrama in my therapeutic work, and thank goodness, because those basic tools of psychodrama, mirroring, doubling, role reversal, they're so powerful. Role reversal in particular, sometimes it was almost like shock therapy, when a person could be in a certain role state and warm up to their sense of being battered by life, or criticised in the world or whatever, and then we'd pull the critic out and sit them in another chair, same person of course, and interview the role of the, sabotager, critic, whatever, the ghost in the cupboard, and in depth get to know that aspect of self. And when the person realised that's them treating themselves like that with the role reversal process, it was like shock therapy, and it was really a turning point in people's lives often. And it's not that every therapeutic session is a big wow breakthrough. Some of them you wonder where you're going with this journey, but sometimes there were very amazing results. And I'm not saying it's the only method that can bring about change, of course, because I later trained in neuro-linguistic programming and found some of those methods very impressive too. But I just particularly loved role reversal and interviewing people in depth in those different roles, and then getting the integration process underway. And I think for clients who were able to enter into that process, I think they came to love it too, because they went away. I remember sometimes people going out the door and saying things like, "Oh, the colours look brighter outside," or something like that. And I thought, yeah, it's like a film has come off your vision and you're seeing things more clearly. I loved that. Psychotherapy, and in mentoring, well, I guess the work I'd done with Warren in the practicum had increased my confidence to work organisationally, and I particularly liked it doing mentoring of senior staff in the hospital. I understood well the culture of the hospital, the language of the hospital, the artefacts, instruments and processes and procedures of the hospital, and I really loved supporting staff in the hospital because they all work pretty hard in an extraordinarily complex environment. It's one of the most complex systems. It's the most complex system I've worked in, hospitals. They're dynamic, they're 24 hours a day. Sometimes there's a lot of urgency. and people are under pressure, and everyone has to work in a team all the time. You don't always enjoy every team member. The team members change because of shift work and people off on holiday or newcomers coming in. There's always a newbie, whether it's a nurse or a new houseman or people changing departments. There's always people learning constantly. It's a constant learning environment, constant change environment. I really enjoyed and got a lot of satisfaction out of supporting those people. And in organisational settings, I could make meetings a bit more dynamic, because you could find out, who is this organisation working for? Let's see the people you are trying to serve, and we'd get set out the community or various shareholders or whatever, and get the management or whatever role reversing with these different sectors, so they could get a wider perspective of what was going on. So we're using sociometry, we're using role reversal without it being too exposing or damaging. And that livened things up in those kinds of meetings too. And in smaller management meetings, if things got a bit tense, sometimes you could get two people role reversing with one another, or one person standing outside, invite the person to stand out away from their own chair, looking back at themselves and thinking, have you got another response to this situation? So they could kind of see how they were being. One time I had a managing director and a general manager who just weren't working well together. And each time we came into a meeting, the general manager wasn't the managing director wasn't really listening to the general manager, and I just kept seeing him being overrided always with the managing director's agenda. And having made several interventions that weren't terribly successful in bringing about change, I asked them if I could video them, and they went ahead and were willing for that. And I took the video away of the meeting and then just edited out a couple of points, moments, where it was quite apparent what was going on, and just showed it. I can't remember whether I showed it to both of them, I might have, or just the managing director. I think I showed it to both of them, but it did bring about a change in their relationship, and I was really pleased about that, because unless everyone's being heard and working well together, it's not working. And it creates a lot of distress too, of course. So I would never have done that kind of thing if I hadn't done my training in psychodrama. Would have seemed a bit too outrageous, but I got a lot more confident. And I think I learned this a bit from Max, of just stating what you see without judgment. Mind you, sometimes he could say things in quite an outrageous way that would have us all laughing, and maybe have the protagonist or whatever be quite embarrassed. But you could do these things by being playful, just to state what is without making it heavy or without making it a criticism, just to be light about it. And ordinary, I often say, let's make it ordinary. This is how us humans are, and this is how we can be like, but when we can see ourselves, we can make changes. So I liked making these things ordinary and just stating what I saw without criticism, and just making it ordinary and light. Let's see if we can come up with something different here that's a bit more effective. So I guess I got that courage in some ways from my training in psychodrama, because it is a pretty outrageous method, and you're allowed to scream and shout and rant and be vulnerable and be infantile and be a tiger. You can be anything. It's kind of rather wonderful and rather freeing. But once you've done all that stuff, you know how to be with that behaviour in other people, and take the middle ground or stay centred in the face of it. and make some useful interventions. I don't mind people shouting or that kind of thing. It didn't scare me, because how often have we shouted in psychodrama, especially in the early days when it was more, encounter was more of a fashion. We carried on, we cried, we shouted, we ranted, but it was kind of freeing, and I loved that freedom.